Hey, what's up everyone? It's Duskmos, and today we're taking a look at the OTO Machines Bébé Chérie. Let's check it out. So we're definitely doing something a little bit different and looking at a mixer today instead of an effect, although there are some subtle effects on board, which we'll talk about. But the Bébé Chérie is first and foremost a 6 stereo channel mixer that has onboard gain and overdrive. There's compressor, there's bliss, and some tone sculpting with tilt EQ or high and low on these last two channels. And it's got a lot of features, I think, for being a small, sort of compact analog mixer that I, for one, am really happy to have in my possession. Mainly because I'm a big fan of everything that OTO Machines puts out. I've had quite a few of their devices, really all of them except for the first that they came out with, the Biscuit, the sort of multi-effect. I'd still like to try one of those one day. And the BIM and the BAM live as the permanent send effects on my mixer. So obviously, when I heard there was going to be a mixer, I was pumped, and I had to pick one up. Although I am a little bit late to the game, they were hard to come by a little bit after the initial batch, but now here we are, and there should be some available right now as of the posting of this video. And if you like what you see and what you hear today, you should be able to find one for yourself if you're interested. You've probably seen my coverage of their boxes on my channel as well. They're some of my most highly viewed videos to date, actually. So there's a good chance that some of you maybe even found my channel because of those. But they're right up there with some of my favorite stuff. I feel like the ethos is something that I can get behind. Like, everything's always high quality. I like the design choices. The sound quality is always really top notch. And the build quality is just insane. All of them, if you've never held a Bim Bam or Boom or Biscuit or BEBE, they're all heavy steel, solid, just bricks. And just really, really nicely, I think, constructed, and will outlast probably my interest in making music. So granted, that's probably going to be lifelong, but I still think they might outlast me. So that's how confident I am in the build on these things. First up, like I said, there are 6 stereo channels. Now you can make any of the first 4 mono or stereo with a toggle that's on the back. All the inputs are on 1/8" jack, so they're, like the headphone style mini jack, which I know some folks have a bias against and some people absolutely love. If there were full-size 1/4" left and right for every channel on this box, it would be probably twice as thick as it is, or a lot wider. And there's really literally no difference between using an 1/8" stereo jack to 2 1/4", pigtail or cable or whatever. It's the same thing. It's just a more convenient jack. There's also an aux jack, which is on 1/8" as well, and the main output also on 1/8", as well as the headphone jack on top. So as I mentioned, for the first 4, there's a flick switch on the back. Kind of indented, it's just like a little nubbin that you flip up or down to be mono or stereo. So if you want to use a mono source, you can hook right in and use a mono, 1/8" jack cable, and then you can just flip to that and then flip to stereo if you want it to be stereo source. Really handy. But on the last 2, they aren't mono or stereo. It is just a flip for a 0 or a +10 dB gain boost, since you lose the gain controls in favor of the EQ on these 2. So speaking of gain, so you can see there's gain control, there's tilt EQ, level, and a push button switch for each of the channels. When the switch is pressed in, it'll light up. I have no power to it right now, but it'll light up and you'll see that channel is activated. If you depress it, it'll pop out. The light will go off unless it's clipping, and it will be muted. But if you have an aux set up out of the aux send, then when it's not depressed, when the light is off, then it's sending out to that aux. I'll demo how that works in my setup. The tilt EQ knobs have a center detent, so they snap kind of right into place. You really feel it. So as you're working the filter, you can kind of tell without hands-on or without eyes on, that it'd be hard to turn a knob without your hands. But you can tell where center is, and so that means there's no effect on the filter / EQ of the channel. And as you go left of center, then you're cutting out highs and you're emphasizing lows. And the more you go, the more you emphasize those lows and the more highs you cut out. Vice versa, you turn it to the right, go up, you're going to emphasize the highs more and more and cut out the lows more and more. So that's kind of the basics of how a tilt EQ works. Kind of jumping around a little bit here, but the gain control goes from 0 to plus 34 dB. And there's a clipping diode in there, so when you really crank it, you can get some really nice, crunchy, grimy, distorted sounds that you can then use the tilt EQ on and filter, kind of, or, just kind of change the EQ up so you can tailor the way that sounds, post clipping. And you've got the channel level from there. And so you can turn the level down, crank the gain up to compensate where you get that heavy distortion clipping sound, but then bring the level down so you can get it distorted and crunchy, but then not have it overpower everything else in the mix. So you kind of have to work both of these at the same time to kind of keep your levels set. But that's a pretty standard relationship for any kind of mixer. So that's how each sort of channel strip works, like I said, except for these last two. So the filtering on these last two, it's a Baxendall, I think it's how you pronounce that. But it's basically a cut and boost of your high and your low frequencies. Level works the same. And as I mentioned, if you want gain, you flip the toggle switch on the back for a plus 10. It doesn't as easily push into that, clipping territory, but I'm sure you could probably, overdrive the inputs and have the plus 10 on and see what kind of ruckus you can bring. Over here, you've got the master section. So you've got your comp, your bliss, your headphone output, and your master output level. The headphone jack works as a second master out. So if you wanted to in some way parallel process this, you have the main outs and then you have the secondary output here as well, which is pretty cool. The compressor is a 3-to-1, and it's just, as you can see, a one knob compressor. And yeah, it's got a kind of medium roll off, which was designed to work as a master compressor, not super like pumping and crazy. But as you crank it, you can still notice a bit of kind of a bit of a ducking effect as everything sort of squashes down, and pretty cool. I reached out and asked about the Bliss control specifically, and it adds air on top of your compressed and somewhat EQ'd and filtered signal. And it actually is a high pass filter that has some phase shifting magic going on that goes from 2K, so 2 kilohertz, all the way up to 10 kilohertz as you crank up the level. So kind of just think of it as like a way to add a little bit of a high pass on top of everything as like a final stage, little sprinkling, a little dash of high frequency. And because it's on the master bus, you're able to dial everything in, get it where you want it to be in the mix, and then you can bring out a little bit of that extra just to, if you need to bring a little bit more sizzle, a little bit more sparkle back. Pretty cool. And this little area here that looks sort of like ventilation is the metering and LED array. And I really, really dig this. Like the decisions that they made to make this happen, super cool. Like the LEDs lighting these individual segments up really evenly, really nice. Obviously we've got here the vertical meters for your levels, and then this is for the compression. And as you compress more, you'll see it kind of work in a horizontal fashion. But that's pretty much it for the controls. Like I said, everything feels super high quality. If you're familiar with the other auto boxes, you know what these knobs are like. Very grippy. They turn really buttery smooth. And this is the same height and depth as their other boxes, their BIM, BAM, and Boom. And it's almost exactly the same footprint as a 606, which I also have. So anyway, they're kind of cool sitting next to each other. They line up perfectly. But now that you've got a lay of the land and know how it all works and the package comes together, let's get it hooked up and mix sounds. I'm going to do a couple different scenarios, 2 different setups, and we're just going to run through and hear how we can mix and sculpt the sound. So let's check it out. Okay, so as you can tell, I've got a lot going on here, a lot of devices piped into the Bébé Chérie, le bébé. And I'll go ahead and start by just explaining how I've got everything routed so you can kind of tell what's happening while it's happening. So on track 1, I'm coming in stereo from the Electron Analog Rhythm Mark II, the analog drum machine, super punchy, super fat. Then on track 2, I'm coming in stereo from the Modor NF1, the super digital synthesizer that sounds really great. I'm actually using the analog rhythm to send MIDI data to the Modor to play a bass line on it into track 2. I skipped 3, so that's just an empty channel. 4 is my OP1 field coming in stereo. 5 is my old Sanyo tape recorder with a tape loop in there coming in on that. And then finally, 6 is actually the return from the OTO Machines BAM reverb coming in on that channel. And how I have that set up is I actually am running the aux out into the BAM and then back into its own channel on the mixer so I can return whatever I send to the reverb and back into the mixer. So the way that works is any channel that I don't have lit up, so you can see, for example, here, it's unlit. Now it's going to the aux, and then I click it in, it's coming back, bypassing the aux. Right now I have the reverb level all the way down on that return, so I can still use these as mutes until I decide to kind of bring that in and show you how that works. So now I think the only thing left to do is just jam. So we'll get things rolling here, and then I'll tweak all the parameters, and we'll get to a nice sound. So go ahead and start the drum pattern here on the rhythm. Right now, just a kick, obviously. Some very sizzly hats as well. It's gonna be kind of a techno jam. So if I want to mute, so right now it's really sending it to the aux, but I have the aux down. If I were to turn it up, you'd hear that coming in, obviously. And then go back. No longer to the reverb. Now I'm going to unmute the MIDI that I'm sending to the Modor for the bass line. Now that's mute because I have the level down on the return for the reverb. See the meters hopping a little bit here. Obviously got compression down, bliss down. We're going to bring those in a little bit. I'll go ahead and play a loop on the OP1 field. It's a little something twinkly. I'm gonna mute that. Clearly. Tap it in and out. Let's instead send it to reverb. But now I can't say, for example, mute the bass line coming from the Modor because it'll now send it to the reverb, but we'll try it anyway. Let's hear it. A little swampy because it's a big reverb on a bass line. Now we'll go ahead and play some of the tape loop here.
Where do we go from here?
That was a little loud, so I'm gonna drop the level down. I have the +10 turned on for it because it was a little quiet. Let's play it again.
Where do we go from here?
A little bit better. Okay, let's experiment with some of the gain here. I'm gonna turn my level down a little bit. As you see, we start to peg it. You're really seeing the clipping light hit there. Turn it down a little bit more. I could really smash it. Give it a little bit more gain. Killed the kick on the rhythm. As you can hear, no more reverb on the OP.
Where do we go from here?
Let's get some compression going now. There is a volume increase, so kind of try to watch my levels. So now I'm really pushing the kick. You can see it's compressing, but everything else is kind of low by comparison. Let's bring everything else up. Actually, I'll bring some drive, some gain on the bass line. Really nice clipping. Let's do the same now with the kick. Really get smashed. So you can hear how bright it is. Now's a good time to tweak the tilt EQ. So kind of kill some of the harshness of those hats.
Where do we go from here?
Let's bring the twinkles up too. They don't hit as hard, obviously, being higher frequency.
Where do we go from here?
Let's say I want to now, on this tape loop,
Where do we go from here?
bring the highs down,
Where do we go from here?
bring the level up.
Where do we go from here?
Let's send it to the reverb.
Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here?
to the level of the reverb so I can do mutes now again.
Where do we go from here?
We'll send the OP to reverb again. We'll do that with the tape loop as well.
Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here?
So obviously we've got a really sort of smashed, crunchy sound. Let's bring some of the air back with the bliss control. To really hear some of that higher end sparkle come through. Reduce the gain on, actually just on the drums. We'll leave it on the bass line.
Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here?
So we think the OP sounds a little bright.
Where do we go from here?
Bring down the
Where do we go from
EQ.
Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here?
Let some bliss.
Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here?
I'll kill the hats.
Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here?
Knock the compression back.
Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here?
A little bit chewy on the bass line with the gain. Bring that back down. When you really hit the compressor, you can get it to kind of duck a little bit like you're hearing now. And there we go. Kind of a big setup, but probably pretty illustrative of how you might actually use this, because you could totally get away with doing a whole live set. You've got a little bit of an outboard, you've got a drum machine, a synth, a couple synths, another source, really hands-on, really sculpting. I dig it. So I've got this set up a little bit differently than the last one, but still a pretty complicated setup here. On channel 1, I've got the 606 from Roland, the vintage drum machine, going in a mono input with the setting set to mono. On channel 2, I've got the analog 4 Mark II from Electron going in stereo, obviously set to stereo. Channel 3, I've got a loop on the Coco Quantus from Ciat Lombard coming in to add a little bit of a weirdness. And then on channel 4, I've got the OP1 field going in. And as you'll see, I'm not using 5 or 6, so I'm not using an effect return. But what I am using the aux out for is actually a little interesting. I'm actually sending the aux into the analog 4 into the external inputs so I can use the onboard effects of the analog 4. And then you'll hear the return of that come in on the analog 4 channel, channel 2. So for example, in this setup, I'm going to be sending my OP1 into the analog 4. Whenever I depress it, whenever it becomes unlit here, it'll go through the analog 4 and pick up the delay and a little bit of reverb as well. In this situation, you have to be careful to not send the analog 4 to itself. So if I try to, deselect basically what then sends it to aux mode, then it's just going to feed its output into its input and create a loop there. Let's just get hands-on. Let's start mixing and hear how we can craft the sound of this setup. I'm going to start actually by turning the 606, so channel 1 here, all the way down. I don't want to mute it or aux it because I don't want it to go to the delay. So anyway, let's kick it off. That's coming in from the analog 4. Fade in the drums. Turn up the OP1 channel, play a loop on it. You hear it kind of has a little bit of a stutter on it. It's in the recording. Let's go ahead and send it to the analog 4 to utilize its delay. The timing wasn't great there. Getting those tape bends. And then de-aux it. Now we're back into just hearing it clean. Turn up the Coco Quantus loop. Punch in little hits of the delay on the analog 4. hit it with some reverse as well. Bring in another little synth, little weird line on the analog 4. Tweaking the time on the delay. It's kind of nice. Took the reverb out of the delay mix. Overdriving it a little bit. Okay, up to this point I haven't done much with any of the gain or EQ or the compression or bliss. So let's change that. Let's get some gain going on the 606. Got everything down except for the kick and the snare. Definitely clipping, driving it quite a bit harder. Do the same for the synths. Not quite as nice on this particular sound, but we'll kind of, there you go, give it a little bit more attitude, but not quite full tilt. Speaking of tilt, kind of clip some of the highs out. like we're pretty compressed right now just by mix alone, but let's get the compressor going. So I'm turning down the master volume. Bringing the compression. Here it's a little bit darker. In fact, I'll make it intentionally darker. As I bring in the cymbals and hats. You can kind of hear where we are. So definitely a bit darker, but now we'll turn up the bliss and you'll hear how it's going to bring out the highs. The compressor's still working really hard, regaining some of that we filtered out or sort of compressed away. And there we go. So as you could hear, this thing is awesome. I am really, really impressed. I picture using this in like a live scenario, really compact. You got everything right here. Yeah, I think it works really well. I like the compression. Bliss is great to have. Obviously the drive is really cool. The gain, if you want to really push that. Muting and the aux stuff also, I feel like works really intuitively. The only thing I would maybe be careful about is if you are using this with an aux setup, you just have to remember that, you know, obviously if you have the return channel on here, you basically lose your ability to mute because you're sending it to the aux, which then is being returned unless you have it turned down. So a little bit more things to remember in the moment, but I think once you've got it worked out with how you want to use it, then it could be just the right thing. I think it also works really well for small tabletop setups. So, you know, you've got big knobs for control, really grippy hands-on-ness, which is the opposite of things like the TX6, which I absolutely love, but you can see that, you know, it's a baby compared to, funny, the bebe, compared to this, but I think there's definitely design and intent behind both of these. This would be less of a hands-on performance type thing, whereas this would probably be a little bit more of. I love this as well, but for different purpose. And I would imagine this could be a competitor in a way to this, but they're obviously very different beasts and they're at slightly different price points and obviously feature sets. And this is analog, that's digital. You know, it would be hard. I'd be hard pressed to try to choose my favorite because obviously I really like them both, but that's not why we're here today. The gain stage with the clipping kind of reminds me of what you get in that Boss mixer kind of range, the late 80s, early 90s stuff. I'm no expert by any means, but I have purchased some of those BX, I think it was BX mixer series from Boss, very big in the techno circles for being able to drive the inputs. And I feel like this kind of is a modern embodiment of that kind of style, but built a million times better. So yeah, if you have any questions, definitely leave them down in the comments below. I'd be happy to answer them for you. I know there's not a lot of content covering this and what it can do and all the details and things. I mean, I think on the surface, you know, it is a mixer, and I think a lot of people just take that for granted and just be like, yeah, it's a mixer. What do you need to know? But I think it's nice to, you know, have somebody in kind of our sphere into the stuff that we're into take a look at this and give some opinions and give a bit of an actual demo, which of course I am happy to oblige. So yeah, definitely let me know if you have any questions. And yeah, if you're in the market for a compact mixer with compression, a little bit of crunch, light EQ, I think it would be really hard to do much better than this. On that note, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.